everybody, Dr. Dean here, your friendly neighbourhood psychologist, and I'm going to tell you today about why 4-year-olds are smarter than you. that's depressing. I'm not really. I'm going to talk about some research that we recently published, so we being myself and Professor Elizabeth Means over at the University of York. So this is a study which actually comes from my PhD work, so it's actually 2 or 3 studies, well 3 to be precise, all put together, and it covers how we developed a decision-making model and testing for use with children, actually. I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of the paper, but if you want to read it in full, of course, there's always a link down there. The title is Probability Errors in Children's Judgments About the Likelihood of Social Characteristics. What does that really mean? Well, what we're testing out is when children make judgments about other people, are they accurate in those judgments? And specifically, do they commit a decision-making error called the conjunction fallacy? Confused already? Okay, let's take a back step. What is the conjunction fallacy? Well, the conjunction fallacy is an error in reasoning or decision-making where we judge 2 or more probabilities that happen at the same time, so that's where the conjunction part comes from, as more likely than either one of those things happening on their own. So, as a really quick example, if I was to say to you, I've just shuffled a deck of cards, a standard plain deck of cards, 52 cards. Do you think it's more likely you're going to draw a black card out of the deck, or you're going to draw a black ace out of the deck? Okay? So clearly, based on basic maths and realistically probability, we know that if somebody told me you're more likely to draw a black card out of the deck than a black ace, well, they don't understand probabilities, likelihoods, whatever. They've committed the conjunction fallacy. It's still an error to say you're more likely to draw the ace out of the deck, any ace, than a black ace. So even though those probabilities are a bit closer together, one of them is going to be unlikely and the conjunction is going to be very unlikely, you can see how that's an error. So our mission was really to look at how this error develops as we age and to try and look if there's any other cognitive correlates such as theory of mind, inhibition, so a part of executive function, as well as things like language comprehension. And then later down the studies, we looked at things like prejudice use and also other forms of decision-making errors or bias, such as hindsight bias. But today I'm just focusing on the decision-making task. So historically we use vignettes of made up people. The classic one is called Linda, and just to give you a brief overview of her, Linda is 31 years old, she's single, outspoken and very bright. At university she studied philosophy. As a student she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Now, Linda sounds like my kind of gal, but that's not important. What we are focusing on is the fact that about 85% of people rated Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement, that's a conjunction, as more likely than Linda is a bank teller. Okay, so what's happening here is participants, and by participants I mean people over 18, adults, they're taking the feminist part of the conjunction, and because that represents the description we've got about Linda, they inflate the probability and they break those rules of probability, which means it's illogical, it's a conjunction fallacy. Now, as you've probably noticed, the wording from that Linda problem is pretty intense. You know, I'm not going to approach a 4-year-old and start telling them about Linda's philosophical viewpoints. I'm never going to mention the word probability, likelihood, anything like that. And so that's kind of part of the reason why these things have been very hard to test with children. So part of our mission was to develop that. How did we do it? Well, over a series of 3 studies, we introduced background information about people who are similar age and gender to the participants or the children, and we gave little stories about them. So this is the form of background evidence. We then asked children to give us probability judgments in the form of a scale, so happy on one end to sad on the other. We validated this using a bunch of questions to do with things that they knew were true and things they knew were false, so we knew it did its intended job. We also added an element which isn't very common, so before giving that story about the person, we asked for a judgment. So here's Jack. Do you think Jack likes football? No information about Jack. And then do you think Jack likes vegetables? Do you think Jack likes football and vegetables in a single judgment? So no information about Jack, but we're asking the children to make some judgments about him. Then we gave the storyboard about Jack, told him about a normal day at school and what he likes generally, what he dislikes, and he would be very representative of a typical boy that age. And we then asked for a second lot of judgments about Jack. So what we're really testing is the effect of that evidence on the children's judgments. And this is where my controversial phrase at the start comes in, where I say, are 4-year-olds smarter than you? So spoiler alert, everybody makes errors in these tasks, but 4-year-olds don't see a magnitude increase in the errors after we provide that information, unlike adults. Does that mean 4-year-olds are smarter than you? No, actually not at all. So 4 and 5-year-olds don't see a massive change at all. In fact, it was about chance levels of errors, so same as if they just randomly chose an answer at the start prior to the information, and it was about the same post information, so after they got told the story. 7 to 9-year-olds, it's similar results, so about chance levels, so they're still guessing basically before they're told any information, and when they are told information there's a slight increase, but it's not statistically significant, so they're as good as randomly answering the questions. However, when we look at 10 to 11-year-olds and also adults, although 10 and 11-year-olds generally make more errors than adults, what's really interesting about the research is that the magnitude of change is comparable. So the magnitude of change of errors before versus after we provide information, they're statistically significant and they increase for 10-year-olds and for adults. So this is really important for us to know. So 4-year-olds might not be smarter than you, but 10-year-olds are pretty close. No, I'm joking. We didn't find correlations with the theory of mind, the inhibition, even prejudice use, things like that, which, you know, is more of a socio-cognitive measure. So that was really interesting. We didn't find anything there. And we're going to be open and honest about that. Doesn't mean that we're done testing those things. Doesn't mean that there might be other things that are, contributing to the development of that decision making. However, the most important finding realistically is that children at about 10-year-old are using something called Bayesian inference. So they are essentially taking information about the world and using that information in an intuitive way to update their beliefs and judgments about the world. The way we can measure that, like I've said, is monitoring the amount of errors they make in these, which are very predictable for adults in these tasks. So super interesting for us. I've got a bunch of other things I want to test. You know, conjunction fallacy is not the only decision-making error we make. In fact, it's one of an absolute plethora of decision-making errors. You know, I'm sorry to let you guys know, but we're really crap at decision making. We're really bad, especially to do with probabilities. So I can extend the research into other areas of decision making errors and biases. I could also look at neurological changes and track people's brain activity as they do confront these tasks, and look for changes as we age there. So that's another area of potential research that comes from this. And then there's things like editing the amount of information that people get presented to look at if that influences the magnitude of change. You know, is it a kind of all or nothing big change just because they have some information, or does the amount of information add up to a different magnitude of new decision, basically? So loads to talk about. I hope you found that interesting. You know, it gives you an insight into my world. I know it's very boring for some people, but I find this stuff incredibly exciting. Let me know if you've got any thoughts or questions or whatever. Remember, you can read it in full if you want. It's open access. Anyone can go read it. Thanks for engaging. Thanks for watching. Psychology is the best. Be kind. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.